In our last session, probably the most consistent theme and message from our speakers was about the importance of engaging with stakeholders. We heard words like ownership, common vision, developing these things from the bottom up, that you have to involve everybody if it is to work, not just in developing your MSP, but also in the implementation, and that continuous process of revision that is required to cope with new challenges and new threats. We're going to delve into hearing some experiences, I hope, of how our speakers, their own experience of engaging with stakeholders, or being, if I can put it this way, a stakeholder who has been engaged with. So being on the push end and the pull end, if you like. Hear from them, same format as the last session, opening statements of no more than 5 minutes, please, panel, and then I'll have some questions for them, and then I will come out to all of you. So let me introduce them. So they are a diverse panel of MSP stakeholders, and we have with us over there, in the far corner, Jacek Zaucha, who is professor at the Maritime Institute in Gdansk and the Department of Economics at the University of Gdansk in Poland. And we heard earlier about Baltic Scope, an area of working together on these issues. We talked also about cross-border cooperation. We heard about that. We look forward, Jacek, to hearing from you in a moment. From Norway, Anne Langos Gosse, Senior Advisor in the Section for Petroleum and Ocean Management in the Norwegian Environment Agency. A very warm welcome to you as well. From a global NGO, Joanna Smith, Marine Spatial Planning Science Manager at the Nature Conservancy, TNC, Canada. From the oil and gas sector, Laurent Vigier, who is General Manager of Actimar, which is part of the Suez Group. And from shipping, Maria Deligiani, who is Senior Policy Advisor on Maritime Safety, Environment and Offshore at the European Community Shipowners Association, better known to many of you as EXA. So, very warm welcome. Let us jump straight in. Jacek.
Thank you very much, Jackie, but thank you, first of all, for right pronunciation of my name. It's impossible for non-Slavic people, so you did a great job.
It's a pleasure, sir.
Okay, so now, sorry, because I can see a lot of people from different continents. So I will start from introducing my region, but it's very difficult to do it without maps. I share this concern with Leo, but I have my own map with me, okay? Can you see here is the Baltic Sea region on my tie, okay? And this is a, very tiny sea with no connections, almost no connections, sorry, because there is a small connection, to the oceans. So with huge environmental problems, as with 10 countries around, or sometimes 11. It depends whether Norway is the Baltic. We can discuss about this. So, okay, and now, total diversity of countries, because some of them, they were, under Soviet bloc, so we received our second life 27 years ago. Some of them, huge democracies. And now we must plan our sea together. It's a challenge. Okay, so if I can finish this short introduction, because then I will be killed. So what is specificity of the Baltic Sea region? We care about environment and we care about people. In simple words, we have the same sympathy to the harbor porpoise and to the fishermen, which is not easy. Okay, so, and another peculiarity out of this is that we love debate, discussions. Always we can discuss. The best Swedish joke is when the train stops and, you cannot open the train. The Swedish start to debate what is the problem. So we like it. And we have a lot of networks. So now about MSP history, because it's a long history. For example, my country, Poland, we have a law on MSP in 2007. And this is a history of networks. So for example, in the Baltic Sea region, the two big boys, HELCOM, which is intergovernmental cooperation for environment, and VASAP, Vision and Strategies around Baltic Sea, which is intergovernmental cooperation for spatial planners ministries. They came together and they say, we should develop wisely the sea. And now I want to refer to the Leo game, because it was a huge experience. Leo gave us task. Please plan. And we started plan immediately without talking to each other. Great lesson. And in Baltic, we avoid this mistake. So from the very, very beginning, we said, first we must discuss what we should plan, how we should plan. And part of this discussion was engagement of stakeholders. And this was, very great experience because we started to know each other in this WASAP Helcom joint group. We start to build trust and understand our stakes. And then at the end of the day, I am finishing. At the end of the day, we made guidelines how to engage stakeholders in our planning. But this is only the beginning, because the most challenging was not, building network between the authorities responsible for maritime spatial planning, but the most difficult was how to engage those people who have their own private businesses. And this was also done somehow by us. It was not easy. We started from tracing what are the stakes of the stakeholders. But I hope that this lesson learned can be discussed further on during our panel.
I hope so too. Thank you very much. And you mentioned that crucial word, trust. I'd like to come back later and learn from your experiences of how do you build that trust, particularly when you have competing interests and competing demands. But let's continue with our picture. From a Norwegian perspective, Anne, a bit of a mixed history here in terms of engagement with stakeholders. We heard talk about fishermen earlier. I think that's been an issue for you. How have you addressed the issue of stakeholder engagement?
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to come here and talk about the Norwegian approach to MSP. And how we involve the stakeholders. Well, this is not about the coastal areas, it's about the ocean. It's about only the ocean areas. Well, Norway has very large seaboard areas, and these are split up into 3 major management plan areas. It's the Barents Sea, the Norwegian Sea, and the North Sea. The first plan was finished in spring 2006, and we have updatings every 4 years and revisions every 12 years. So it's a cyclical and ongoing process. And as you will understand from my presentation, we put a lot of effort into describing, into the description of central questions. And this is something about the stakeholders anyway. So the work is divided between a steering group from 7 ministries, it's the government, and a management group of 10 agencies. And the fisheries, the energy, environment, shipping sectors, and others participate equally in this work. And both the steering group and the management group are roundtable arrangements. So this means that all stakeholders in an official position are at the table and work together with the plan, completely directly. But now, what are they working with? The management group develops a common knowledge base that is open to the public, and which gives a sound and strong basis for the work. And scientists and other reliable parties contribute to this. But the cross-sector topics are dealt with directly with the management group. And, for instance, conflict areas. And the stakeholders who are not directly working with this, they are invited to input meetings, to consultations, to workshops. Earlier we had a reference group, but that didn't work so well because it became too much for them to deal with in one time. We involved them too late in the process. As the plans are regularly updated, we have a predictable process with timetables and a clear role allocation, so that the stakeholders know when it will be their turn to contribute. I mean, the stakeholders from outside the round tables. Yeah. So in this way, trust is built on the firm organization and the transparency of the process. So this is how we think that, yeah. The resulting reports from the management groups, which are preferably consensus reports, and with the input from the stakeholders, they form the professional basis to finalize the work. And the finalization, the final decisions are not made by this group, these groups. They're made by the government.
Okay. That brings us to a very crucial question about what we mean when we talk about engagement. How does engagement translate into action, as it were?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when the government, they have to use these reports, consensus reports, and they have to balance very carefully the different interests, and they also, of course, are allowed to put the political value choices into the decisions.
Okay. Thank you very much. That gives us a clear idea of how the process works, and it does raise those questions, and I'd like really to ask our panel to define for us in a moment what we mean when we talk about engagement, so that we can then see how that all fits together. Thank you very much. And Joanna, from your perspective, how does it work for you as a global NGO now? And what do you see as the keys to really effective engagement?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this conference. It's very exciting to be here. And I will speak, as the Nature Conservancy and its affiliates, not all NGOs, just to be clear, because there's World Wildlife Fund and Conservation International, but so TNC has been involved in marine spatial planning since about 2006 and held its own workshop in 2009, very similar timing to the UNESCO guide, creating a guidebook for best practices. And I would say that was one of the roles, or is one of the roles, that Nature Conservancy and other NGOs can play in terms of marine spatial planning, which is advisory. They prepare technical documents. They prepare scientific outputs. For example, the Nature Conservancy has many staff. We have over 600 scientists. We work in 72 different countries, and we have people that are expert at MarkSan, for example, which is a systematic conservation planning tool. Other roles that the Nature Conservancy has been playing is around fundraising for marine spatial planning, as well as innovative financing mechanisms. So the Seychelles Marine Spatial Plan and the debt swap is a refinancing mechanism that will help pay for the implementation of the MSP, as well as relieve some of their international debt, all for conservation and climate change adaptation goals. Rarely, actually, the Nature Conservancy has made a decision fairly early on. I mean, I would say MSP is a teenager, right? It's sort of 2006, so it's 11, maybe it's a tween for people out there that are parents. So we sometimes play a stakeholder at the table, representing conservation or biodiversity, but more often than not now, we're working in 22 different countries for marine spatial planning, and I added it up, it's around 9 million square kilometers of ocean. We're playing more of a facilitation and planning role. And I think in terms of keywords that you have, I think is your theme as a facilitator, as a moderator, is building that community of practice, which is a message we heard in the first panel or session 3, and how to continue to improve upon the community of practice so that there's evidence-based decision-making, for example. We can share lessons learned, and that we have data-driven decisions. What do we do, for example? How do we share lessons between data-rich geographies and data-poor geographies? And it's important to know that distinction if you're looking at marine spatial plans that were built in a data-rich environment versus building a marine spatial plan which is in a data-poor environment. And then lastly, one of our roles is around stakeholder engagement and designing processes using lessons learned from other places and really about people. And understanding MSP is understanding culture. And I get asked to work in a lot of different places, and I always say, I need to know how do people make decisions there. Need to understand the culture. And so we focus on making governance frameworks that are anticipatory, adaptive, and obviously transparent. But it's that anticipatory and adaptive that's really key.
And as you say, that question of culture and understanding it, very central. Let's just complete the picture and then we'll come back on some of those challenges. From an industry perspective now, Laurent Vigier, how do you see stakeholder engagement now? How effective is it?
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Yeah, I feel a bit isolated in that audience because I'm a private company, and but I will try to survive anyway.
I think they look like a friendly bunch. I wouldn't worry.
And as a leading player in resource management, the Suez Group is active in numerous fields of activity. I mean, from water and water treatment to the recycling and recovery of waste and consulting. I mean, the spatial planning and urban development and the management of their impact on ocean is also part of the activities. I mean, the group is committed to offer global and concrete solutions to protect the ocean with a strategy of resource protection and circular economy. I mean, the action includes partnerships with NGOs like Expédition 7e Continent or Expédition Med, or we are also supporting the World Ocean Day, leading by UNESCO. We are also active in leading research and development programs focused on plastic and microplastics. As you know, plastic fibers are present in wastewater and are launched in the ocean. I mean, the challenge is then to implement industrial solutions to reduce or prevent the release of plastic fiber in the environment. Just two key project examples. I mean, we are protecting biodiversity in Marseille Harbor by returning the marine fauna to the dikes and quays and to restore an ecosystem of more than 50 species. We're also protecting 24 kilometers of coastline in Morocco between Casablanca and Mohamedia by implementing anti-pollution system, which in fact intercepts the discharge of wastewater and perform an additional treatment before evacuating the treated water into the sea. Focusing on oil and gas, I would say, I mean, dg-mare is a company of the Suez Group and a specialist on metocean analysis and operational oceanography. I mean, our main domain of activity is related to oil and gas, I mean, exploration and production. Oil and gas exploration and production are, I mean, conducted in various regions of the world, I mean, especially at sea. And the desperate need to more and more energy lead to move the activity towards remote areas. I mean, often with complex environmental conditions. Oil and gas exploration, I would say, can be considered as a pioneering industry, but with a high level of risk and a potential cause of pollution. I mean, recent example of accidents are here to illustrate this feeling, I would say. So it is then very important to mitigate the associated risk and also to properly coordinate these activities with all the other marine users. For me, one of the key for an efficient marine planning is the knowledge of the environmental conditions that are characteristic of a specific area. The challenge is then to get the right information at the right time, not only some real-time measurement or observation, but also predicted data, forecast, I mean, using numerical modeling techniques. I mean, acquiring and sharing data and information to help avoid and reduce conflicts is one of the key items of an efficient marine planning. However, the stakeholders are not interested to receive terabits of data coming from different sources, with some of them unchecked or unreliable. And it has been a long habit in the oil and gas industry to join forces, I mean, often driven by the required capex for any offshore exploration or production. It also has been a long habit to share information, I mean, non-strategic information, obviously, and organizations such oil and gas producer or IPIECA, which is the Global Oil and Gas Industry Association for Environmental and Social Issues, have been championing best practice in environmental and social performance for over 40 years.
Okay, lots of issues to come to briefly now, if you would.
Yeah, okay. And one of the mission of a company like the Suez Group is in fact to transform data into knowledge. And for that, we have specific tools. I mean, present IT tools allow to manipulate large volumes of data, and web platforms give the possibility to access and monitor useful information.
So one of the crucial things that engaging with stakeholders does is gives you access, that resource, to develop evidence-based and to take account of local knowledge, traditional knowledge, industrial knowledge. I'd be interested to know how you all make sure that you capture all of that data and all of that knowledge. But Maria, from a ship owner's perspective, complete the picture for us, will you?
First and foremost, thank you also for inviting us. I think the fact that we are part of today's panel proves that we are engaged and we want to continue being engaged in the whole maritime special planning process. We represent all the national ship owners associations of EU member states plus Norway. And when we speak with our members about maritime special planning, we understand that there is a different level of engagement from country to country. We understand, of course, that this also depends on the progress that has been made at a national level, and especially now that we have the Maritime Special Planning Directive in place that obliges all EU member states to draw their plans. For us, in order to achieve also an effective engagement from a shipowner perspective, I think it's important to know that the competent authority and the other stakeholders understand the nature of the shipping business. Shipping business is based on the principles in UNCLOS, on the principle of the freedom of navigation, and on the principle actually of respecting the recognized shipping routes. So we wouldn't like to see, as we see actually that the pressure on our seas and oceans is increased and there are many, many players coming out there, we want to make sure that there is no problem in the safety of navigation. Possibly you have heard cases where ships, traditional ships, obviously not offshore supply vessels, ships, they had to deviate from their routes due to the construction of offshore windmills. That's a typical example where we can see an add value of maritime special planning, because obviously it's not easy just to deviate. It creates additional costs, it creates additional working hours, of course, additional fuel that you have to burn, so there are many implications coming out of that. And of course, there are also dangerous situations that may be created, like having an accident. So it is important for us that the rest of the world understands the nature of our business, which is very much based on the freedom of navigation, and we do not want to see any structures at sea that actually are hindering the navigational routes.
Thank you. So we talked a lot about understanding MSP in the last session, how many stakeholders didn't understand it. You're now saying, yes, you also have to understand us and where we're coming from. Can I just ask you, what does stakeholder engagement mean to you? Is it being informed, communicated with about what planning authorities are doing? Is it being consulted? Is it actually negotiating? Is it building MSPs from the bottom up? What does it mean to you to be engaged?
It's actually everything together, I would say, that a stakeholder is engaged if from the very beginning understands first and foremost what is the role of MSP, what do we want to achieve, and why me as a stakeholder will actually benefit from being part of this MSP process. So when you're engaged, you understand that from the beginning until the end and the finalization of the plan, you are there. You're there to provide input. You're there to provide data. For example, as ship owners, we have been asked in various countries to provide data from ICE, the automatic identification systems that are carried on board. So we're trying to give as much input as we can. And I think it's very important indeed to gather information and also understand that each and every stakeholder needs to be approached in a different way. For example, if with a certain stakeholder, you may need to have a consultation, or with another one, you may need to have a one-to-one meeting. So it's very different, I would say. But if you're engaged and you are from the beginning until the end, and of course, I guess that in every plan we develop, we need to have kind of a period, I don't know, every 3 years that we evaluate this program.
So that crucial issue, Laurent, is when. That it is right from the beginning, because somebody said in our last panel, well, we did this, but we did it too late. How important is that, and what does real engagement for you as an industry rep? Do you feel that you are genuinely being engaged with, or are you more being given information? Because they're quite different things.
I think the important thing is to be involved at a very early stage. I mean, not only the industry or private companies, but also all the, civil society. I mean, we see a number of projects with great difficulties because the public has been informed very late, or has not been, or a very bad communication on the advantage of that project. And, I'm speaking about wind farm in France, for example. I mean, I don't know if it is a good example, but I mean, wind farms in France have been delayed because there is a long process of authorization and civil society consultation in terms of approval and so on. So, I mean, as industry, I think we need to be involved at a very early stage. And also to have all the information available.
Thank you, Gianni. You talked about building a community of practice and working in all these different countries. Does engagement mean different things at different times? How do you define effective engagement? By which I mean, just to clarify perhaps, is it about making sure simply that you have a dialogue and you communicate? Is it about formal consultation? Is it about actually negotiating what's in the MSP? What does it mean? Or does that definition vary depending on the country, the culture, and so on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think my first answer or my first context would be back to MSP is about people. And so MSP then by extension is about culture. So understanding what engagement means depends not only on the culture of the country, but the culture of the stakeholders. So for example, actually using shipping as a great example, understanding the sector itself. So understanding, for example, the IMO, understanding that where a sector gets its rules from, and that there's a great variability all the way from multi-million, multi-billion-dollar sectors to the recreational kayaker and windsurfer or kiteboarder. And so when you're designing stakeholder engagement and effective stakeholder engagement, that definition and the preparation of that has to be informed and driven by the culture of stakeholders. Asking an oil and gas company to participate and produce maps of their priority areas and provide either proprietary or non-confidential data to the process. It can be password protected. There's all kinds of things you can do. It's very different than talking to a recreational sector which has never mapped their use. So the effective engagement has to
So there's two questions here. Is when we talk about engagement, it's different, but it's also which stakeholders? How do you identify who you really need to speak to? And just I wanted to come back on a point that you made about, in the end, it's the government that decides, as you said.
Did I say that?
You have your processes, but in the end, they have to weigh it all up and come to a decision. Does that make it more challenging to engage all stakeholders? I mean, in terms of convincing stakeholders of the benefits of being involved, of being engaged, why they should give their time to this process. How do you go about getting their buy-in to do it at all? If I could just ask Anne first on that, and then
I was going to answer this. There was two questions in what you asked me, but it's okay.
Sure, I'll come back on the other point in a minute. It's just because of something you said then about which stakeholder. How do you get them?
Well, they are really engaged, and even ministries who have not been invited into the work from the beginning, they wanted to be there because they want to look after what is happening. But I mean, on the agency level also, all the agencies and all the managers who could be affected of this want to participate because they want to be. It's a power to describe also. It's not only to make the decisions. We have it's a kind of power sharing. The power to describe and to put topics on the agenda is for the managers and for the stakeholders.
Thank you. Thank you. Jacek, in terms of this question of what engagement really means, and I'd like to come to this question of which stakeholders, and Joanna, I'll come back to you then, but what to you, when you talk about and you use the word stakeholder engagement, what does it mean? Does it mean building this together? Does it mean quick consultation, quick nice chat? We'll tell you what we're doing, you give us a bit of feedback, and then we'll go away and...
No, forget Jackie, please. Engagement means ownership. That's it. Point. So if we engage, then we want to build an ownership for the process, okay? And now there are 3 very simple rules for engagement. One was spelled many times. Now it was engage when the people can influence the process. Because other way around, the second rule, listen. Because we as spatial planners, sometimes we think that we know much better. And it's so difficult to listen to the others and to understand that this tiny fisherman can bring something new to our knowledge. And then the last thing is, we should say from the very beginning, and you somehow covered it, that spatial planning is not a win-win process. Because, this is a trade-off. And at the end of the day, somebody, and this means our, democratically elected representatives, they will decide what is more important from the societal point of view. So perhaps windmills are more important than fishermen. But to finish this, the key issue for proper engagement is, therefore, that everybody wants to freely express its opinions, but the others want to listen. Because it's not only a problem of us planners, but it's also problems of other stakeholders, that you will make a culture of listening and understanding each other. And I will finish with one example, which I am always given. Okay, so if there is a very pushy NGO coming to me and telling me, you must protect environment. Okay, great. I always ask these guys, but now, take a head of a fisherman, because he has no possibility of fishing because of this environmental protection. Should we protect fishermen as well as a part of our cultural landscapes, or we should allow fishermen to die? And then it makes a new, way of thinking.
So what you're saying is it's important that stakeholders themselves confront those trade-offs. Because I was going to ask you, how do you resolve conflicts and what criteria do you use? You're almost saying, make them do it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best way, because we should facilitate the process. The biggest mistake to my mind is that if we think that we are the sole owners of the process. No. We should facilitate it, we should put it on a common ground, but not to push our own ideas.
Any reactions to that before we move to the other issues? Joanna, how do you actually make that work so that they work through the process of dealing with the conflicts?
I hope I provoked you.
Because it is as Jacek says, getting people are very good at coming to a meeting and saying, this is what I think, but then listening and adapting to find the compromises. How do you advise people on making that process really work?
Well, first I agree with Jacek, so maybe it's not. Sorry, I seem to have a frog in my throat.
Do you need more water?
No, I'm good. I think it's just the airplane travel.
We don't mind a little. If you're okay, struggle on.
It's a Canadian frog, sorry, friendly frog.
Canadian frog.
So, one of the ways that you can immediately get a reaction from folks to find out how well you're doing and listening is to show a map. And either a zoning map or here's where we understood you told us over the last 4 meetings where your high priority areas were, or this is where we heard you say future development occur, and then you make it spatial and put a map out on the table or up on the screen. That is one of the best ways to actually get it to find out how you're doing.
Because they're going to react pretty quickly.
Yeah, if you put the polygon in the wrong place, or you thought you heard we do a lot of participatory mapping in various places around the world. St. Kitts and Nevis, a TNC team was there for a multi-objective design, 5 objectives, and a lot of it was not in any kind of database, so they had to map it through workshops. And At the end of the day, you're showing, it's like, is this where you said your artisanal fishing was most important? And absolutely not. We didn't say it was there, it was over here. And so, I mean, one way to get their ownership and buy-in is to spatially reflect what you thought you heard they say, and them say.
And then check it.
And check it over and over again. Yeah, you're always ground truthing.
Maria, just from the perspective of a stakeholder, this is clearly the ideal way to go. You resolve, you recognize the trade-offs, you accept the other side's issues, and you bring yours to the table. But in practice, is that how you feel it works? And if it doesn't, how can we... Is that a question of trust? That you trust those leading the process to lead this process in a fair way and try to reflect genuinely? How do you think, if that's Jacek's ideal of what works, how do we get there from your perspective?
I would say that the role of the competent authority here plays a very essential role. And obviously I speak as EXA, so I'm speaking on behalf of the European ship owners at this stage. And for us, the MSP directive does play a crucial role. And we do expect the competent authorities to be objective and understand, like I mentioned, not only the needs of the shipping industry, but all the different industries that they are involved. And for us, I heard this earlier from another intervention. It is important, I think, for the competent authority to understand how the sea is today, but how it's going to look after a couple of years. And if you look at the Ocean Economy Report 2030, gives you already some very good figures of the new upcoming and emerging industries that are coming over there. So shipping is a well-established industry, and I think that this needs to be respected. Shipping, shipbuilding, and many other industries. On the other hand, you have emerging industries such as offshore wind, etc., etc. We do not think that one is more important than the other. We simply believe that one is very different than the other, and each and every industry has its own importance that needs to be respected. So we want an objective approach by the competent authority.
Okay. So Laurent saying there that this top-down, if you like, how you set it up, how the engagement is structured, and that you have trust in that process before you engage is very important. And then you get the top-down thing, Jacek's ideal of working together to resolve the trade-offs would work. Would you agree it's that mixture?
Yeah, but I think you have to have a pilot on the boat. I mean, and an efficient crew. I mean, if you put 20 people in a room and you close the room for 3 days and saying, okay, get the MSP after 3 days, you will get nothing. I think. I mean, I just watch the exercise at 1 o'clock in the other room, and we realize that it's, even for 20 people around the table, it's very difficult to communicate and to share information and to cross information, I would say, because there was 3 countries and absolutely, or I would say, no communication between countries. So the challenge is to define which stakeholder around the table. If there are too many, I mean, you will get nothing. The problem is to select the efficient and proper stakeholder, I would say.
Well, that is indeed, and that brings us back to the point, Joanna, about you said at the beginning, you know, that the stakeholder goes all the way from the giant oil and gas companies down to the kayaker. How do you decide, how does one decide which stakeholders, and is it different stakeholders at different stages in the process? And Anne, I'd like to ask you the same question of how you decide who to get round the table, but Joanna first. How do you know who should be round the table?
Well, that's tricky, but I would say that there are some guiding principles probably to narrow it down a little bit. Certainly, you could have the kitchen sink approach, which is that anybody that is affected by the plan is a stakeholder, and that is true. I mean, if their work or their recreation touches the ocean, they're going to have an interest and possibly an invested interest in what happens, right? So that's first. But secondly, there is a guide from the Marine Spatial Planning mandate in a country. So, for example, what is in scope? So what is the plan for? And so it's a little bit like, who do you invite maybe this is, I can't think of it, to a party, but no, it's like, so if the marine plan process is for identifying, say, new marine protected areas, meeting renewable energy development goals and possibly reducing conflicts between two users, or two sectors, let's say aquaculture and diving, that can't occur in the same place, they're usually incompatible, then first and foremost, those people need to be there.
Put them around the table and try and thrash it out.
But then you would need people tangentially affected by a siting of new aquaculture or affected by diving. But certainly figuring out what is in scope gives you a good list of who needs to be at the table.
Okay. And how do you address that question in Norway? How do you decide who should be at the party?
Well, as this is for me only about the ocean areas, it's much easier than to go into the coastal zone where there are many smaller interests. So then I must answer from my own experience then. Well, we bring in those who have interests. I mean, first of all, people in the official positions, because they know very well the interests of the administrative frames for the respective sectors. And they also could use a lot of working time on this. So then to help to bring in additional views and points, we have, for instance, we have a workshop on different topics where more interested people can come in and work.
Jacek, do you, if I could put it on the spectrum, taking Joanna's analogy from the kitchen sink approach, everyone, anyone who could possibly have an interest, to maybe at the other end of the spectrum, the people who disagree most, going back to your point about trade-offs and let them work it out, who do you think, how do you decide which stakeholders need to be around the table? Are you at the kitchen sink end or the troublemaker end, if I can put it? Who are we going to have most difficulty with? How do you decide? And then I'm coming out to all of you.
Okay, you can have two approaches there, okay? One approach is you want to have your plan adopted. And then, if this is a very pragmatic approach, you should focus on those who are well organized, they have power, they can influence your outcomes through the policy process. That's one issue. And the second issue, if you're thinking about the quality of your plan, your approach should be totally different. Then you should think about those who have no voice, okay? Because Polish experience or Latvian experience is that, for example, if you don't go to the stakeholders, some stakeholders, to their own environment, they will never come to the meetings organized by you because they have no money, they have no resources, they have no time. One of my experiences is that if you want to engage local fishermen, not those big ones, those small on the boats, you must even check the proper time, the times they are not fishing. Okay? So everything depends what you want to achieve. You can have very pragmatic approach, fine. Or you are thinking about your plan as a kind of long-term investment in the development of the sea area. I must say that when I'm looking on our governments, I would say that the first approach is prevailing. Because if they give us 1 year for preparation of the plan, so what you will do? You will focus on those stakeholders which are making you troubles, or the big companies and green NGOs, shipping lines, those who come.
So that doesn't necessarily get you that ownership by the local communities that you need. Yep. Maybe it's two processes in tandem. I want to come back on this question then also of, we talked quite a lot in the last session about it being an ongoing process and how do you make sure they're continually involved. But Anne, a quick one if you would.
I just want to add to him. I also think the sink level is also very important because they help to the quality assurance of the plan, and they also help to put left-out topics on the agenda. So it's very important.
Thank you very much. Let's just see if there are any questions at this stage from our audience. And I'll come down so then I can see you under the bright lights. Yes, please, Steve first, and then I'll come to you, sir. Brief ones, if you would. Yeah, you just press the button. There we go.
Hi, Steve Diggin from Coastal First Nations in Canada. I was just wondering if you could comment on maybe the top 3 indicators of successful stakeholder engagement.
Thank you very much. That's my sort of question. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Javier García Zanabria from the University of Cádiz, Spain. I have had 2 main problems leading participation process. One of them is when you achieve a really good participation of the public, but then you don't have enough political support. At the end, nothing is coming, so the people get bored. And the other is in Spain, we don't have a really good culture of participation, so sometimes you reach the political support, but after the people don't respond. So you are giving arguments to the politicians to not to support again another public participation process. So what is the best? When you don't have the keystones to make a participation process, it is better to start or not to start the process because you are going to give not desirable arguments to the politicians or to the people to participate.
Thank you very much indeed. An interesting dilemma. Yes, please, sir, over there. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Xiao Recio Blanco. I'm the director of the Ocean Program at the Environmental Law Institute. I think my question will be directly mostly to Jacek and to Anne. And I wonder if and how stakeholder input and the information that stakeholders provide is integrated into the regulatory process for the implementation of marine spatial planning.
So, and that raises the question of the expectations of stakeholders. Right. So, and it sort of links to your question as well. If you've consulted them, how does that translate? Last one, if we would, and then we'll come back. You press the button in front of your laptop. That's the one. The one in the middle next to it. No. That's the one.
This one.
Yep.
I'm Antonio Diaz de Leon, former Director of Environmental Policy in Mexico. And certainly, I have many agrees and disagrees with the panel, especially in my country, MSP, it's a public policy instrument, and it's driven by government. You need political will, you need good human resources, you need money, and you need stakeholder participation. Not the companies, not only the companies are the stakeholders that live in the territory. The stakeholders have broader stance. So if you don't engage them from the very beginning, that public policy instrument won't have validation and legitimacy, right? So the thing is to have them from the very beginning, all of them, especially, I agree with the TNSC lady, the conflicting ones. They have to be from the very beginning that you have to be able to address who are the most representative as possible, and you have to open your meetings to everyone. So that was my comment.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's come back and we'll come back to the 3 indicators in a moment if we like. But this question really of political will, the relationship between stakeholder engagement processes and the political will, what you do with inputs and therefore the expectations. Once you put stakeholders around a table, how do you make sure that they don't feel, well, there wasn't much point in all of that? Because there are a number of questions touching on that. Would anybody like to? Jacek?
Yeah. Okay, so with the indicators, it's a great question. So I would say following. The first indicator that I made engagement is that stakeholders want to reveal their secret information. So, for example, fishermen will tell me when they are fishing. In reality, it's almost impossible, I know, but let's try. And the second indicator of right engagement is when at the end of the process, they want still to cooperate with me. When they will recognize me, they will shake my hand, and this is very important because MSP is an interactive process. So if we discourage them, because within the policy process, you can do whatever you wish. But if you discourage them, then they will not come back because they think that it's on vain. Okay, so about indicators. And now I think about this political commitment. It's very important, but I can give you some examples when visionary planning done without policy commitment worked, and it worked especially in terms of engagement of the stakeholders. So then it was a building around a kind of community, you know, which worked together. I would say that from my perspective, the politicians, they like to have stakeholders, but this is not the must for them. I mean, for them, the must is to have the plan. But of course, all these regulations, they say you should involve, but usually they are not telling precisely how, when, by what means. So this is, but this is dependent on this middle level of the planner. So it was so nice listening to this Namibia that this was a case when those people started to really, be engaged and understand the specificity of MSPs. This is great because this level is decisive how you are engaging. I mean, when you are designing the MSP process.
Please, Joanne and then Anne.
So I gather we're answering the
You
indicator
can go
question.
on indicators, yeah, he ignored me, so fine.
Okay, so great question from Canada and the MAP planning process. I would say, and knowing Steve, so I worked with Steve Diggin on the Marine Planning Partnership. So in Seychelles, the Nature Conservancy is leading on behalf of the government the marine spatial planning process there for the 30% marine protected area and blue economy climate change. 3 ways that we will measure in the partway through. We're almost finished phase 1 and we were looking at entering phase 2. So first is the percent of the sector that's involved in attending every meeting, so some kind of quantitative metric. To Jasek's point, it's kind of about enduring attendance. So the endurance, marine spatial planning is a marathon. It's not a sprint, at least although it feels like a sprint sometimes, sprinting marathon. So the enduring attendance value. The other is, and actually I learned this while being in the Marine Planning Partnership for 3.5 years, is with the advice log, Marine Planning Partnership recorded every piece of advice that came in. We do the same now in the Seychelles MSP. And I'm looking for an asymptote. So the number of new issues that arise. So are we meeting often enough, and are we encouraging participation, and have we developed trust that people are giving us what their issues are? So I'm looking for the asymptote. We are no longer getting new issues, or if they are, it's because the price of gas went down and or went up, and so now oil development. So we're looking at an asymptote for the number of new issues. And then thirdly, so those are 2 quantitative metrics, and this is, again, like Jacek, Poland has all kinds of great comments. There's a qualitative measure in terms of indicators, and it's that a meeting, can you just hold the microphone for a second for me? A meeting starts like this, and no one's touching their water, their books are closed, so it's like this, the meeting starts like this.
This isn't going so well.
No, and it ends like this.
Kissy, kissy, hug, hug. Okay. Is that a good enough indicator for you, Steve? Yeah.
So it's a qualitative, but I use that as an indicator that things are going well.
Okay, so if we all get touchy-feely huggy, it's perhaps going in the right direction. Anne?
Yeah, well, I cannot say exactly the same, because, of course, stakeholders will ask what's in it for me, and they participate if they know that it's important that they do participate. And they must be sure that it makes a difference. But I would say that we have this factual base, the decision base, which follows the work from its settled and through the updatings, and the factual base is always updated, and new knowledge comes into it, and it's open to all public. I think it's very important so that everyone who wants to contribute to this will see their contribution in the factor base.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if the politicians do not make the decision that one stakeholder wanted, well, I mean, you cannot make everybody happy.
No.
And it's also necessary to explain clearly out from the both objectives and why this result has come.
Thank you. Laurent, Maria.
Yeah, I think the issue of the stakeholder engagement is also time. I would say, I used to say that public authorities and private companies have not the same clock or not the same notion of time. As fishermen have to fish today and not in 2 years' time, and oil and gas industry have to drill now and not in 2 years' time. And we understand that. Implementing a marine planning is a long and ongoing process, and okay, it takes time. But we have to find a compromise between waiting too long. That means private companies or private stakeholder will give up because they have no time to wait for a decision or plan.
Maria, you wanted to come in here as well.
Yes, basically, I was just thinking, how could we achieve the maximum possible stakeholder engagement? And I think that from a maritime perspective, it is very important to know what the competent authority actually wants from us. So this should be clear from the very beginning.
Which goes to that question about what do you do with the input?
Exactly. Yeah. What do you do with the input? Because you cannot really have an evidence-based maritime special plan, and if you do not have the stakeholder engagement, because the stakeholders are the ones that are actually giving you input, which is very specific on this industry. So it's important to know what each member state wants from us. And of course, we need to have achievable goals, a specific time frame, and specific steps on the way to achieve the completion of a certain
plan. So all
plan.
of that comes back to a point of transparency. How do we fit into this process, and what are you going to do? Because Jacek, so one of his indicators was you share your information with us. What are you going to do with it? Jacek wants to jump in and then I'll come back to you.
I want to comment what was said because it's a really important statement. Sometimes we think that the stakeholders, they should be engaged when we are talking about solutions. And equally important is to engage them on the level of collecting evidences. So for example, in Poland, it took us 3 years only to collect evidences, what is going on. And in this process, we had 3 times meeting with stakeholders. And it works, because now nobody will tell us, okay, something is missing.
But going back to his point about also his indicator was, are you willing to share the information? What creates an environment in which you do feel that you can and you will share that information? Are there times when you think either it's not worth the effort to put it together? No, always.
I wouldn't say because it's important to inform about the routes that have been agreed at an IMO level, why there are certain routes such as the traffic separation schemes, that these are areas where there is extremely a lot of traffic that we need to take particular attention. So I cannot imagine a reason why we wouldn't like to share this information, but of course we want to see this also from the other sectors, and of course we need to be open and understand that there might be conflicts. So I think that another aspect of a good plan is to try and predict what potential conflicts may arise among the different industries. And I think that from the shipping sector, we would be willing also to discuss this and try and find, of course, a common solution.
Joanna, was there something? Yeah.
I think it follows nicely the second gentleman's question about the culture of participation.
Exactly.
I think, and I think was the question whether to start or not start?
Yes. When you're not sure, I think on both sides, when you're not sure you have the political will to deliver, or when you're not sure that the stakeholders will deliver what the politician wants, if I get you right. If it's both ways round, could be a problem.
So I think you would start small. So marine spatial planning, I think, challenges the status quo of traditional governance in the sense of it's not sector by sector. It's an integrated plan. It's ecosystem-based approach. And it requires, by definition, if you agree with the UNESCO definition, that it's a participatory process and public. So if that's not already the culture, and you For example, there are places where we work around the world and there aren't stakeholder associations. I mean, we're lucky in Canada, we had a commercial fishing caucus where we had, charter operators were organized. In Seychelles, we're having to organize 800 charter operators and ask them to bring one person to the table and an alternate. And it's very challenging. I mean, just their own process of how do we get 800 people down to one? And they're from lots of different countries. So I think it's starting small. And another thing we learned out of the Marine Planning Partnership process in Canada, not we, TNC, that's when I was a consultant, but they need funding. And this is where we can also be grateful to Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for thinking ahead like that. Like these people.
So when we talked in the last session about capacity building in the context of MSP, but here capacity building, even training perhaps in how you get involved, how these processes work, and how you can play your part. Maybe necessary money to do it.
That's right.
All really practical issues.
Very practical, logistical things. And I think
and as Jacek said, don't have the meeting when the fishermen are at sea.
Or Laurent said, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like there's different schedules, and in countries along the equator, there's the fishing seasons and cyclones and whatnot. So yeah, you need to be able to
time frames. And remember, industry works to a different rhythm and time frame to you.
That's right.
And you wanted to come on to this, and then I want to come back to the ongoing process question, please.
Well, I just want to add that the MSP or ecosystem-based management is not only maps. It's a lot. There are many other dimensions also that have to be taken into account. So that's why in Norway, at least, we would not start with the maps and show the conflict areas. Sure. We would start with all the many of the other dimensions also.
Thank you. Laurent, can I come to you on this point? We've talked, and at the beginning, one of Jacek's definitions of success was, do you come back for another meeting? But Joanna also talked about how often you're meeting and whether new issues are coming up and so on. For you, if it is, you talked at the beginning about how important it is to be engaged early, but is it also too important to be engaged often? So how often do you want to be as industry? How often do you want these processes to happen in order to make sure that you are, somebody asked about new threats in the last session, we talked about adaptive MSPs. For you as an industry person, what's the ideal frequency, way of making this work so it doesn't become a burden, but you can give your input when you need to?
Thank you for the question, Jackie. It's a good and difficult question. I mean, we are talking about years to implement marine spatial planning. Obviously, on an industry point of view, I mean, years are very, very long in terms of objectives and so on. I mean, I cannot really answer the question. I mean, it's depending on, I would say first on what are the objectives, what are the timelines, what are the targets, and I mean, for me, we need a master plan and we need objectives in terms of times. I mean, we need to, and we will participate as often as we can, or as often as we are invited, and as often as we can bring something to have this plan progress, I would say.
That would be the key, that you have something to bring to the table. But as we've heard, Maria, did you want to come in on that point? No. As we've heard, and you've all said, it takes time, it takes human resource, it takes financial resource. So, Jacek, how do you strike the balance in terms of keeping that process going, that it isn't a one-time event? Because I imagine in some places they say, okay, we did a consultation, that was great, and they were fine, and we got our buy-in, and they gave me a hug at the end, so that's fine. But how often do you need to be talking? How do you decide how to keep this interactive, going back to your indicator of success?
I would say there's no compromise about that, okay? So we are doing MSP now in Poland. I am responsible for this plan. And I received 2 months for making the first draft of the plan. And the whole process will continue to 2019. So look how much time you need for iteration of this first plan with different groups. If you do it other way around, you are cheating yourself and you are cheating your society. That's my
Start
feeling.
with the objective and work back to what you need to do.
Of course, the problem is that it can be painful for some industries because, for example, our windmill industry is stopped because I am doing a plan and they cannot develop themselves. And this is a problem, a real problem. But now here it's not my cup of tea. This is cup of tea of my government, okay? That's it. But you are trying now to do impossible because engagement is MSP is one of the most complicated issue and will not find an easy solutions. If you look to the MSP platform, which is the best source of information, the greatest number of good practices is on engagement of stakeholders. So it's immense issue. So I would say that for me, if I can conclude this from my side, engagement is a learning process. I cannot tell you at the beginning whether, what will be the result. You must always be open and adaptive to what is happening.
Thank you. And in terms of how often you engage with your stakeholders, how do you decide?
It depends upon what stakeholders are you talking about.
Yeah.
We have this roundtable group, which works. We meet, I think, 4 times a year, but we have a plan for the work. So there's a lot of work going on, and we send.
It's quite structured, and you know what you're doing. Yeah.
So when we have, for instance, a report that we want to have the view from other stakeholders on, we can make a workshop or a small conference or something. But we have learned that it's important to take only topic by topic and not too much, because the stakeholders who are not participating closely will have very big problems with coping with everything on one time.
One other question before we try and draw some conclusions. And Joanna, it goes back to what you said you're working in 22 countries. We talked about cultures and so on. To what extent, Jacek just said, look, this is probably the area where there are more best practices that we can find out, we can look and see what each other's doing. But given the need to take account of your specific culture, of your specific way, to what, as you go around the world advising people, do you say, well, look, here's the system, this is what they did in X country, that worked really well, do that? Or how do people know how much to steal from each other and how much they really have to answer this question for themselves, depending on their own culture and where they are in the process? So whether they are an infancy MSPer or a pioneer, what advice would you give them about that?
So that's a good question. I think the advice, and I'm one of 20 or so marine spatial planning practitioners within the Conservancy. I'm the global lead. But advice, I think you answered your own question with the question, because it varies around the world to what extent a government or a marine spatial planning body wants to learn from another place, or they just want to do it themselves. And so I think, in terms of community of practice, what the Nature Conservancy tries to put together also with our partners are, global best practices guides or guiding principles or lessons learned. And I think it just really varies from place to place.
Try to overdraw conclusions from it. Just say, this is what people have done, this is what happened.
Exactly.
And you can take any other comments to that before we draw some...
Look on failures.
Look at the failures.
Yeah, of course, look on failures.
I look at, I actually tried to look at, there's many management books out there, but I look at successes probably more than I look at failures. Like, what are the things that have succeeded? You can get lessons from failures, but it's hard to know why things fail. But when they've succeeded, it's like, what was the recipe you used for this success? So I sort of take the lessons from those books, I guess.
Maria.
Yes, I would say that this is actually a very important element, and it is also linked to the capacity building discussion, because I think it's also one of the main goals of the European Union to try and invest on this capacity building also in other parts of the world and promote these blue economies and on how we could use our seas in the most sustainable way, I would say. So it's very important to draw lessons, first and foremost in-house, so at national level, and then at European level, and then promote this at the international level. In this way, we all learn from each other. So I think that's a very important element.
Thank you very much. Now, my next question isn't fair. My last question, because given what you've said, that you have to look at these things and study them, and it is different wherever you are. But based on your own experience with stakeholder engagement, if you had, I don't know whether it's one priority for action because it'll be so different, but one piece of advice might be a better way to identify, one piece of advice that you think everybody who is trying to do this right and get it right, one piece of advice for them to take. What for each of you? You can also have a priority for action if you see this in that way, but do you have one piece of advice that you would give? So a priority if you have one, and one piece of advice. Maria first, I'll go down the line.
So these are two questions?
Two questions.
Two
One
questions.
is, do you have advice for anyone? What would you advise anyone trying to do this effectively? And do you have a priority for action for the future to really boost and make this stakeholder engagement work in the way that we've heard it should?
So first, if a stakeholder wants to do it effectively, you mean, or from the part of the competent authority?
From the part of the competent authority to engage with you.
To engage with us. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's first and foremost understand, identify first the stakeholders, understand their different needs, and then make sure they come up with a plan where there are achievable goals, a concrete time frame, so that we know when and what exactly is required from our side. And of course, we need a good evidence-based plan, and I think that this is where our role is really crucial as an industry.
Thank you very much. Laurent?
Yeah, I will try to answer both questions in just one phrase. I would say my opinion is that an effective MSP needs a real manager, not only an organizer or coordinator, but a manager with power and authority. Okay, it's maybe a dream, but that means at least a challenge, because there are many players in any planning. So that's maybe an advice or a priority I will put on that question.
Thank you very much. Joanna?
Are we answering both questions?
You can answer both at the same time, yep.
Okay, so the priority action, I would say, and this follows actually from Bud's intro comments about planning is for the future, would be to map priority areas now and the future development areas. And get that started as soon as possible for any MSP. And then advice. How many people have watched the television show Amazing Race? Not
that many.
Not that many? Maybe it's too much of a North American television show. Anyway, I was going to use that analogy, but I won't. But MSP, I'd say, I come from a sport background, sailing and whatnot, is a team sport. And the Amazing Race is these teams they're all the same goal. They're trying to win some huge amount of money, I think. But they have to get there. How they get there, each team is completely different, right, in the decision. So the advice is figuring out how are you going to make decisions. So to what I said a few minutes ago in terms of looking at success, the teams that win in the Amazing Race, they successfully make decisions efficiently. Because you have to make thousands of decisions. You're going to make, if you're in a 4-year process, or 10, or 2, you're going to make thousands, hundreds of thousands of decisions. So figuring out how you're going to make decisions and having the full buy-in and support from the stakeholders and with the government institutions, it's integrated across many ministries, that would be my piece of advice.
Thank you very much. Anne?
Well, I think that important ingredients are equal and direct participation, and the process must be predictable, and it must be very well defined, and there must be clearly communicated objectives. And also to understand each other's roles is also necessary to be clear on. So I would say it's more than a dialogue, it's a cooperation, I would say. Yeah. So if I should pull out one priority for action, I think I would distinguish very clearly between the work with the professional knowledge, with the knowledge base, and the decision phase. I think there must be spent very much time on this, on making this knowledge base, and this must be very open and accessible, and one must also be able to use it later. So I think in the factual base, it's must be the status of the area, all different interests, the socio-economic situation, developmental trends, knowledge needs. It's important to have everything.
Thank you very much indeed. Jacek, you have the last word.
Oh, thank you very much. First and last. Okay. In terms of my priority, I think that the most important is to have a stage in your planning process that you totally changed the way of thinking of your stakeholders. So such a Leo game, I mean, that they must perform different roles and they understand now the problems of the others. Of course, what was said before is equally important because, you know, early engagement, evidence-based, all this, but this is in top of that. And now what would be my advice to the government? And my advice would be not to combine formal spatial planning with the stakeholder process. Stakeholder process should be run permanently, not attached to the planning and then stopped. So you must work with your stakeholders, you know, on more permanent basis. You must build them. You must understand and create this trust. And then it will be much easier than to engage them if there is a real decision or solution you must find.
So don't think of it as the means to one specific end, but a means to make an ongoing process work. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed? Thank you to you all. We are going to close for tonight. I just want to tell you a bit about tomorrow as well. But of course, today we have heard about the importance of this issue. We started, one of the phrases that stuck in my mind from the opening session was the commissioner's, his words read by Jürgen Müller, when he said, "It's MSP is a must have. It's not a nice to have." And he talked about the importance now of shaping the future. We've heard a lot about what different countries are doing, and we have benefited from their experience and the lessons that they have learned. But we have also heard how very different the situation is from country to country, and a lot of caution here about too much sort of cut and paste, if I can put it that way. But there is a huge repository of best practices to share. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from each other. The question is what bits of it you then, in your own circumstance, take out. And crucially, in underpinning all of this, what we've just been discussing, just how important stakeholder engagement is, and getting it right will deliver massive rewards. Getting it wrong, and I was interested in the difference between those who measure or judge things by what went wrong and those who judge by the success factors, but getting it right, absolutely central to effective MSP. Getting it wrong, deeply counterproductive. Ownership of that process. How do you get it? How do you get everybody? How do you get industry? How do you get NGOs? How do you get fish? Everybody to feel ownership of that process, which I think speakers in both our panels have underlined is absolutely crucial if it is to work. So that is what I took away from today. And tomorrow, we're going to drill down into many of these issues more. And we started the day with our opening speakers talking about ocean governance. And we will start tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with a session on the connection between MSP and global ocean governance roles. Also focus tomorrow on cross-border cooperation in MSP. We touched on that in the last session. How do you make it work? How do you incentivize it? What are some of the challenges and good practices for science-based MSP? But before that, ladies and gentlemen, you get a reward for all your hard work, whether it be on the stage or in the room listening. I wish you a very pleasant evening. I would like to just thank all our opening speakers today for what I think you will agree has been a very inspiring and challenging start. And I wish you all the very best with your discussions over the next 2 days. So have a good evening, and the organisers will see you back here tomorrow morning, 9 sharp, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as we say in English. Thank you all very much.